Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Big Sky Now podcast. I'm your host, Josh Amick, and I want to give a shout out to Mark. He returns this week from the injured reserve list. Ian is not going to be here this week, so he's listed as day-to-day. Should be back next week. But thank you, everyone, for joining us. I still have John and Fritz here, as always. Want to jump right into it. 8 teams last week. We're down to the final 4. So let's go over what happened last weekend. Montana State handled Idaho easily, winning 52-19. Tommy Mellott was super effective with his legs, leading all of the rushers. Were we surprised by Idaho's defense allowing 52 points for a team who's been good defensively all year, Mark?
Not totally. I mean, some of those scoring drives came off of short fields because of Idaho turnovers and or just crazy calls that didn't work out. Secondly, Montana State is good. I mean, they do that to a lot of teams. You asked Idaho what was so good about Montana State, and they immediately said it was the offensive line. I mean, everybody talks about Mellott and the running backs and all that other stuff, but they don't do that without an offensive line. So that's a big factor. Another thing, I don't know if that was a big deal. I was watching the replays and I noticed they always try to run away from Keyshawn James Newby, especially on their runs. And he's a great pass rusher and sack artist and all that stuff. But they ran away from him on the run too, so that apparently they didn't even want part of him on the run game either. So not totally surprised. I mean, they kind of did it before and they've done it to other teams, and that's why they're in the semis.
Think if you told me beforehand that Montana State was going to put up 52, I don't know if I would be surprised. If you told me that it was going to be a blowout and they put up 52, I think I might be a little bit surprised in that regard. But it just felt like Idaho made some mistakes. There was the fumble there in the second quarter, the interception out of the half, going for it on fourth down on that first drive. That just kind of gave some of the momentum over to Montana State. And then that big flourish at the end of the second half or end of the second quarter and beginning of the third quarter that just kind of busted this game open.
Like Mark said, plays didn't work out. I thought when Idaho drove and they settled for a field goal, I know, but it was 10-10, and it felt like they were holding their own and had a little bit of momentum. And then they tried that onside kick, and their guy got almost all tee. The ball went only like 3 or 4 yards and gave Montana State great field position, and they almost instantly scored. And they just never got the momentum back. And then the other key play was the flourish. It looked like Mellott was kind of bottled up. Then he was going to scramble, and then all of a sudden he's gone for about 63 yards and out of the 2-yard line. He had Idaho guys colliding 2 different times, trying to get the angle. He ran right down the sideline in front of Jason Eck and all those Vandals, and they scored right before halftime. Now it's 31-10, and the game's pretty much over. And Montana State has done that to a lot of teams. I think Idaho was holding its own until they lost momentum, and then once you give away momentum to the Cats, you just don't get it back.
Speaking of Jason Eck, news dropped that he was leaving the Vandals and is going to become the new head coach at New Mexico. How shocking was this news as you found out in Idaho, Mark? And how big of a loss is this for Idaho's program?
Well, obviously it's big. I mean, he took a team that was kind of mediocre and turned them into 3 straight FCS playoff teams. Maybe the bigger loss is, let's see, I haven't checked Twitter in 20 minutes, so this might be updated, but I've counted 20 Vandals in the portal, including 9 of their all Big Sky conference. So this isn't like, bunch of guys who didn't play. This is like a who's who of their team. Lane, Cummings, Buchanan, their wide receivers, Dwyer and Hamper, a bunch of O linemen, Afalava, Malachi Williams. You could do a whole podcast just on the 20 guys in the portal, but that's a bigger loss. It's kind of funny. We kind of didn't know what Eck was going to do. There wasn't any rumblings about him until like Friday night before the game. Somebody posted something on Twitter about New Mexico being interested, and I was like, and you kind of wondered, okay, what was going to happen? Is he going to go from a really good FCS team to a, pretty, a losing FBS team? But Obviously the money is a lot more than it is at Idaho, no matter what, how good the team is. So I don't know. I didn't know that I thought he would leave this soon. I thought maybe another year. I mean, 3 years is, I don't know. I guess we just because we hadn't heard anything, but I know like the first year he was there, I think that after 7 games, people were saying, how long is that going to stick around? Because he'd done such a good job in such a short amount of time.
Yeah.
And you don't know. The other thing you don't know, I've seen some stuff about maybe it had something to do with, the in-house at Idaho, that maybe he was leaving that, but I don't know. Maybe this was his goal all along. The other thing is the last 10 years he's been an FCS guy, year at Montana State and then 6 at South Dakota State and 3 at Idaho. So he knew the FCS landscape. He knew what it took to win. From that aspect, you thought maybe he'd stick around and try to do it that way and try to build Idaho to the point where they could do that. And so I don't know. I guess the last thing I would say is the last time this kind of happened and Fritz would remember this, when Idaho was good in the 80s and early 90s, they turned over coaches every few years too. They went from Dennis Erickson for 4 years to Gilbertson for 3 years, John L. Smith for 6 years, and then Chris Tormey the last year in the Big Sky before they went Division I. So this has happened before. So it's a big loss, but it's also with a caveat on who Idaho finds to replace him.
Yeah, I think Mark covered pretty much everything that I had for talking points in there. All the transfers, that was definitely the big news for
making up for 4 weeks of lost time.
Yeah, you got all the knowledge about this one too, Mark. So I'm not going to interrupt you at all. But yeah, it's just the kind of the day and age of college football at this point now. Coach leaves and everybody hops into the transfer portal, and you don't know who could come back, who could go to New Mexico with Eck, and who's going to go elsewhere. So it's just unfortunately for fans, it's part of the game now.
Yeah, I think the only name that I had written down that Mark didn't mention was Jackson Eck. He's in the portal now too, Jason's kid. I think all those kids could play at New Mexico, which I'll remind you gave the Bobcats probably their best game, their toughest game this year, and lost. And I was going to do the same thing Mark did. Mark and I are old enough to remember when Dennis Erickson left Idaho for greener pastures, not once, but twice. And the good news for Idaho is they kept winning in the 90s. And by the time they left the Big Sky, they'd beaten Boise State something like 11 years in a row or 12 years in a row. They had it going. So all is not lost. But, man, I didn't realize it was 20 players in the portal. Probably going to be more.
Yeah, speaking of transfers too, I read that New Mexico's quarterback Dan Pierre, he's in the transfer portal too. I think he already committed to a team. I can't remember which team that was, but yeah, he's gone too. So a lot of moving parts for the Vandals and for New Mexico. But moving on to the other team in the Big Sky playoffs was UC Davis. Their rushing attack was held just 89 yards. Larison only rushed for 40. Was that the biggest difference in the game, or what do you think went wrong with the Aggies here, John?
I mean, Larison getting hurt in the first half is always going to be a big deal. The fact that he wasn't able to play for a good portion of the game with that ankle injury. But then you also have to count in the fact that they turned the ball over 8 times. You're not going to win a playoff game with 8 turnovers, your quarterback throwing 5 interceptions. I mean, the defense did a great job of keeping them into the game. They were doing the bend but don't break strategy, but getting turnovers down in the red zone, couple of interceptions there. So, the fact that it was a 35-21 game with all of these factors playing in honestly kind of seems maybe like a good result. You don't want to take a loss as a good result, of course, but it could have definitely been much worse.
Yeah, considering all that went wrong for the Aggies, it was 28-21, and if they could have got a stop, who knows what happens. And then, of course, South Dakota just drove right down and made it a 2-score game again and took the starch right out. Yeah, Larison, basically, they didn't have Larison for almost 3/4 of that game and still moved the ball up and down the field. A couple of those turnovers are red zone deals. They had a double pass where the first receiver, the running back got swarmed and he tried to lateral it and bounced it, and that was a fumble recovery for them. I thought the fake punt was a genius deal. They got a first down and kept possession in the third quarter. And then South Dakota, I thought maybe called timeout just to give the guys a rest because they're getting beat by their tempo. Davis went tempo and was really doing a good job, I thought, until every single turnover that happened. And the play after that, they threw another pick. It was a screen pass that would have gone for miles, but one of the D linemen jumped up and tipped it, and another D lineman caught it. And so it went. And I think it bears mentioning that South Dakota has two guys who have rushed for over 1,000 yards, and that Tice guy is a load, and he's going to pose problems this Saturday too in Bozeman. I think he was a big problem too. He went wrong for the Aggies.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would add on top of the turnovers and not having Larison is, you wonder if this is it for UC Davis for a little bit. I mean, this was their team to do what they were going to do, especially with Hastings and with Larison. And you wonder, what they got coming along after that, if this was just it for a while, and then they'll kind of drop back in the middle of the pack.
Yeah, we shall see. I mean, I saw that the Hastings had 5 interceptions. I didn't know they had 8 total team turnovers. It's very hard to win any football games when you turn over that much. 8 is ridiculous. But the last topic I have for this episode is talking about the transfer portal. Rumors are swirling that Vesperis was offered by the Grizz to come join the team, but also the Grizz lost out to a couple of good players decommitting from the team. Is this just how the transfer portal is going? Is there something to be worried about in Missoula, or is it kind of just too early to tell with so much still going on, Fritz?
Well, I think it's there's some strange things going on. That was a 3-star O lineman that decommitted from the Grizz and got a full ride to go to Carroll, which is an NAI school playing in the Frontier Conference. That's surprising. The Mihalish deal, Merrick Mihalish is a AA player of the year, and he might be the Gatorade for Montana. And, I think at the 11th hour, the Grizz came back and said, yeah, you have a full Scully, and we'll put you in the quarterback room. By that point, he'd already made up his mind to decommit and go to Tech. And so he said, thanks, but no thanks, and went to Tech. The portal is a tough business. I think it's also notable that the Bobcats have really made hay in in-state recruiting, and I haven't seen a whole lot of in-state recruits leave either the Grizz or the Cats and go out of state anywhere. They've gone back and forth, but they haven't gone out of state. And the fact that the Cats seem to be doing a better job and getting more depth from Montana kids, which is a great recruiting base, I think that kind of speaks to what they have going on right now. And beyond that, you're just rolling the dice with the portal. And, I think Bobby Houck has done a good job by and large, especially not this past season, but the season before. I mean, he landed a quarterback that won 11 straight starts for him, or 10. And, it's just the way the world's working right now. Look at Idaho, 20 in the portal. So the Grizz have got to adjust and rebuild, and the portal's going to have to be a big part of it.
Yeah, to kind of jump on what Fritz was saying about Montana kids, it's kind of, you look at Idaho and all but one of those kids that are in the portal are not really local kids. I think there's one kid from East Valley of Spokane. Everybody else is from Western Washington or California and stuff like that. Plus, you factor in the coaching change, and that's going to put more in. But they ran into this last year. They had 8 or 10 in the portal, and they were all pretty much guys from out of town. They weren't local kids. So as it relates to Montana and Montana State, the fact that they have so many Montana kids, they seem to be less likely to leave Montana for somewhere else. Like Fritz said, the people that have transferred have been, people that weren't from there anyway. Wilson from Texas, and I can't remember who else left, but Fife was from somewhere else too. So you're more likely to lose, kids that aren't from your area to the transfer portal. So they haven't, Montana should be so lucky that they're not like Idaho that just, become, that just losing people right and left now.
Lose a quarter of your roster. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look at, what if Junior Bergen, if Junior Bergen had left after last year, that would have been news. If Tommy Millot had left,
Oh my
before,
God.
that would have been news.
La
I mean,
la la. I can't. Oh,
so that's, and you don't know how much, I don't know if either of them spoke to being Montana kids wanting to finish up at a Montana school as a reason for staying, as opposed to taking however much money was offered to them. So, people in Idaho aren't going to be terribly sympathetic to people in Montana, because Idaho's losing a lot more people than either of the Montana schools are.
yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to say that this is it goes to show the recruiting power of maybe the Frontier Conference being a top tier NAIA conference. Some of that top end, at least, with Carroll and Western and Tech. Um, so but at the same time, you don't want to lose out on recruits, especially in your home state, like Mahelish. But like Fritz mentioned, that was just kind of it felt like they knew they were losing him, and they threw the quarterback thing in there as a last ditch effort to get him to stay committed in Missoula. But I also wanted to point, just kind of you guys talking about kids from Montana coming to play for the Bobcats and the Grizz. Fritz, wasn't the signing day list of the 16 signings, wasn't the majority of them from Washington this year? It seemed like a lot of Western Washington kids, and
For Montana, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And then a bunch of Montana kids were on the Bobcat ledger that came out, and they had a bigger signing class too. So that's part of it. But yeah,
It just almost feels like maybe Montana's trying to expand their footprint beyond just the Montana kids. But I feel like that the depth in recruiting from in-state, there's a lot of these kids that get overlooked by bigger schools outside of the state and have that chip on their shoulder. They don't want to go play elsewhere. They want to stay home for that. So I think going away from Montana schools could be a mistake for the Grizz in terms of recruiting if they are trying to maybe move to the West
I'd
Coast more so.
I'd like to add that like my favorite '08 team to cover from the Grizz was '08, and their four best players had a total of one half a scholarship between them. That was running back Chase Reynolds. Um, Colt Anderson was a walk on. Mariani was a walk on. Ty Corwin, the good linebacker, was a walk on. And I think Bobby Hawk was able to get a lot of kids to go and come in and walk on. And in retrospect, I can't believe some of these kids had to walk on because they were so good. And I don't think you can really get away with that anymore, especially when you had an NIL. You just got to you got to go a little bit harder at these Montana kids.
One last thing I want to talk about with this specific subject is the offer to the Sparrows. We've talked about it all throughout the year with Montana, and them playing two quarterbacks, and the plan was Ayat to be a starter for 4 years, and then now the news is rumored to be that Vesperis has been offered to Montana. There's no denying his talent as a quarterback, but does it seem like they're kind of going away from their plan, or is this just more so about like you got to get the best player available, and Vesperis is a great quarterback who would fit well with the program? What do you think?
Well, if I can go first, I think Bobby's always brought in a quarterback. He believes in competition at every single position, and I thought Andrew Sell was going to be the guy 1 year, and he still brought in somebody to compete with him in Justin Roper, and so that was '09, and then '09 and '10 they both wound up sharing time. Sell wound up being the starter in '09 toward the end when they made their second straight title game. So yeah, every year, I mean, they had Cole Berquist, and this is pre-portal, for 5 years. He started as a redshirt freshman. He brought in Josh Schwager from WSU in '06, so Cole had to sit the bench. Then '07, '08, Berquist started again. So there's a 3-year starter, but he didn't get to do it consecutively. And '08, he was money. He had a really good season. And you just wonder if that shouldn't happen sooner with a little bit more continuity. Did I answer your question? I'm not sure I did, but anyway, that's what I had.
You did fine, John. I know you got some thoughts. I mean, you've already kind of discussed this. Is this good that they're talking about bringing Vesperis in, or does this hurt? Obviously, it hurts Ayat, but with him playing the last playoff game, Well, I mean, what is Montana doing? Does this make sense to even talk about this guy coming in?
Yeah, I definitely think so. Like Fritz mentioned with the competition aspect, you've got to go through the whole spring process with football. You don't just want, yes, you want a guy taking majority of the reps, but maybe not in spring ball. You want to split it up and get everybody some reps out there and develop. But competitions, as long as it's healthy competition, it is going to be great to help development as well.
But I don't know how you bring in Vesperis and say, yeah, you could possibly be the backup. I don't think that'll work.
Yeah, I don't see that happening at all either. He's too good of a quarterback, and this, correct me if I'm wrong, but this would be his final year, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't think he would even commit to Montana unless he has that reassurance that he is going to be the starter, which could, we talked about it earlier in the season. Maybe it could affect Ayat's plans if he is not the starter. But Mark, you got any final thoughts on this subject?
Yeah, I mean, he obviously, the fact that they're even thinking about bringing him in means, we're happy with Ayat, but just in case, let's bring in this other guy just in case, we had Fife and Ayat last year and kind of went back and forth like a yo-yo with those guys and stuff like that. So that kind of tells me that he's not quite, doesn't have enough depth in that room. Maybe Flowers are still a year or two away, and I don't know who else they got in the quarterback room, but you can promise Vesperis he's going to come in and start, but that doesn't mean anything after, if he plays a bad first game, then they just go to Ayat again. So,
right.
So you gotta, so that's something they got to think about. And plus, I don't know what other offers Vesperis has, but he there's a lot of teams he could help out there.
Yeah, that's what I was actually just going to bring that up. He's got offers, according to his Twitter, he's got offers from Tennessee Tech, Murray State, and Southeast Louisiana. Those are the only other 3 offers he's got right now.
I appreciate that information. Yeah, I mean, judging off of those 3 teams, no offense to them, but Montana is definitely a better team than those other 3. But any other things we want to say, Fritz, about this subject?
No, I just I was remiss in my article when I talked about Fife in the portal. I think he's going to go to New Mexico State, right? I think New Mexico State's very interested. That's what I heard. And then I mentioned the quarterback room is suddenly pretty empty, and I didn't mention Cody Schweiker from Columbia Falls, who is still listed as an athlete, but was in the quarterback mix during fall drills, and he's just a great athlete. So they've got 5 guys, counting Ayat and counting Flowers and counting Cade Hewitt out of Helena High, and you've got the Glacier kid, Slider, and then you've got Schweiker. So, but I imagine there'll be a 6th by the start of spring drills.
All right, we shall see a lot of news going on in the transfer portal. It's hard to keep up with, but we'll do our best here at the Big Sky Now to keep you updated with that. We'll also have a new episode dropping on Thursday, breaking down the final 4 teams and the final 2 games that we have. Should be a good week. But thank you to my panel, Fritz and John, and welcome back to Mark. We'll see you all next Thursday on another episode of the Big Sky Now podcast. And until then, take care.